Welcome to a special edition of Family Matters. And in the media, on Television New Zealand, they featured a Sunday program. Now, the Sunday program was about transitioning kids. And in it, they featured two families, one where a young girl was transitioning to a boy and a young boy was transitioning to a girl. And we were concerned that the program wasn't going to raise some of the red flags that medical professionals are raising in terms of the effect of young kids transitioning, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, just where the parents will get both sides of the debate. Unfortunately, our suspicions were confirmed and it was a very one-sided presentation. So we wanted to, for the sake of parents in New Zealand, we wanted to speak to medical professionals who could give the other side, could talk about those red flags. And to do that, we have Professor John Whitehall. He's a Professor of Pediatrics in Australia. And as a neonatologist, Dr. Whitehall has been particularly interested in the embryology of the brain and the effect of drugs such as alcohol. It was this concern about the interruption of the developing brain by drugs that blocked puberty and evoked sexual characteristics of the opposite sex that inspired involvement in the gender dysphoria debate. And in fact, he came to New Zealand a couple of years ago to speak on this exact issue. Dr. Whitehall, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome, Bob.
So what we'd like to do is just go through parts of the Sunday program. And I want to say from the outset that it involves two families that have fronted up with their stories. But at the same time, I don't think we should get into, and I know you agree with this, let's not get into the specifics of those two cases because they are very personal. There's obviously a lot of information we don't get in a short documentary on TV. And also, I guess we all have empathy for the family. As a parent, and I know as you as a parent, Dr. Whitehall, we want what's best for our kids, and when our kids aren't happy, we do what we can to try and solve that unhappiness. So, you know, our hearts go out to these families. I guess the question, or the questions I want to put to you is, are they getting the best advice? And for other parents in New Zealand, what is the advice that should be given? So, look, can we just go through the program, and I want to show certain clips and get you to comment on the information. Is that okay if we do it that way?
Yeah, yes, it is, Bob. And like you, my heart goes out to these families. They're in pain. They love the children. They want to do what's best. And nothing that I say in general terms should be taken to apply to these people for whom I have compassionate regard. They've made their decisions and so forth. We are extrapolating generalities, and that's it.
Okay, so let's get straight into the program. And right from the outset, there's a very strong narrative that's coming through. And so let's just have a look at that very first bit of the introduction of the Sunday program.
Tonight we meet two families with children who say they were born in the wrong bodies. From the moment they could speak, Nikita said she didn't feel like a girl. Levi insisted he wasn't a boy.
Okay, so we hear that narrative, Dr. Whitehall, born in the wrong body. Is it factual? Is it scientific?
Well, it certainly there's no scientific basis for it. That's absolutely true. Is it factual? Well, it's become factual in the sense that it is now been described as a social contagion. I have used the word fad, which people object to, but it is a new phenomenon. That's unarguable. It's a new phenomenon. When a child psychiatrist in Western Australia here published a paper in 1985, he looked back over preceding 5 years in that state and could only find 8 children who were confused about their gender in that whole state, in that whole period. And when they looked into it, this was not a matter of being born into the wrong body, but in this particular case, there was a relationship issue with their family. And when that issue, and I'm not saying this applies to the ones in New Zealand, but I'm referring back to this article. They were boys then who claimed to be girls. And The issue went like this, that mum had been badly treated by a male, marriage had fallen apart and so forth, and she didn't like males and had very good reason for not doing so. And suddenly the little boy is much more appealing when he's in a dress, and then the little kid recognises, well, that's a good way to bring a smile to mum's face. And that was the way those 8 children unfolded. And when they were separated from that challenge, the children, according to the writer, reverted to an identity in congruence with their chromosomes in a rapid time. Just on further than that, when I first became interested in this in 2016, because I heard a talk at a pediatric conference on it, I polled 28 of my colleagues and said, look, this is a burgeoning issue. Have you ever seen anybody or been involved? And there were 28 pediatricians, a cumulative experience of 931 years, and they could remember 12. Now, 10 of them, they remembered because of the comorbid mental disturbances, and 2 of them, the children had been victims of prolonged sexual abuse. There's something as new has happened. So what's new has happened is the internet, favourable reports on television, a la Sunday night, and that kind of promotion. And it is therefore I would say this is a sort of a psychological, social, and indeed political problem. It's a political problem now in Australia, because if you don't go ahead with the affirmation, you can go to jail for 10 years in Victoria. So it's kind of psychological, social, and a political problem now, which didn't exist. I never saw anyone in all my pediatric practice, and I had a very, very big practice in the rough and ready western suburbs of Sydney for something like 20 years. People brought all sorts of sexual problems along. Nobody ever said, Jimmy thinks he's a girl. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so the gender spectrum is obviously something that's being taught a lot, especially to young people. So you mentioned about the growth of patients in this area. Let's just look at that clip where they do deal with that issue.
They are the expert on themselves, and their own, their journey is unique.
Dr. Rachel Johnson is a paediatrician and specialist in adolescent sexual health, treating young people across Auckland.
Currently we've got around 300 young people from the ages of 12 to 24.
Is there a gender spectrum and variabilities across that spectrum?
Absolutely. Gender is driven by nature, nurture, culture and time, and that interweaving, so it kind of makes sense that it's not one binary black and white thing.
Okay, so Dr. Whitehall, that's an interesting statement, that gender is driven by nature, nurture, culture and time. Is there any medical truth to it?
Well, yes, I think there is, in the sense, not in terms of nature. You either get binary male or female chromosomes, but it was very revealing, I would thought, when she said nurture and culture, because that's exactly what I'm saying. This epidemic of confusion arises in the nurture, the wider nurture of the child, and in the wider culture of the media and so forth like that. And that's the way I believe it should be approached. In Victoria, they'll put you into jail if you do this, but the psychiatrists, the psychotherapists, the counsellors, and should sit down, okay, well, what is it in this nature, in this nurture? What is it in this culture which is causing this grievous misconception in this child? That's what they did in Western Australia years and years ago, and they found the issue was a sad relationship with mum. That's nurture, culture. And yes, I agree with her that that's what we should be doing, and that it does come from there, and that we should be looking into that. I am propounding that instead of rushing to hormones and that sort of stuff, there should be individual and family psychotherapy, counselling, asking what on earth has gone wrong in this situation. So it's interesting that you would say that. With regard to nature, there is no natural explanation for this. Is a child an expert in themselves? No. Children have all sorts of misconceptions and fears and nightmares and so forth. We don't say, oh, yeah, you think that there's, a dragon in the room. Yeah, you must be right. Part of being a parent is to raise the child and to teach the child and to lead the child in the direction of truth and not let it sink into misconceptions and mistruth. I disagree strongly in that. A little child is not an expert on what's going on in the world. I mean, stranger danger. You can't just say to the child, yeah, you're an expert on yourself. This man, he looks really friendly. Let's go with him. No. We do exactly the opposite. We teach in a loving, compassionate way, ideally, the truth to the child. The child needs our guidance. We can't be guided by the child.
So they've done surveys to find out just how many kids think they are transgender or not sure, and so they commented on this survey. Let's just watch that clip.
According to a recent adolescent health survey, 1.2% of Kiwi teens identify as transgender. Twice as many aren't sure of their gender.
So you've actually written about this particular survey. You looked into the background of it because the DSM-5 actually says that there's a number of categories that determine whether you have gender dysphoria, and it's not actually based on ticking a box by a young person.
No, the unreliability of those of asking adolescents anything, quite frankly, is well known. But in that thing, the people just asked, have you ever felt that you might be a girl or a boy or the opposite sex? Have you ever felt, oh yeah, tick, even if you believed what they were ticking. But the diagnosis of gender dysphoria in reality, according to DSM-5, is much, much stricter than that. It has to be a persistent, resistant, consistent conviction. Here you've only asked, did you ever think you were a boy or a girl? Yeah, tick. That's the very first thing. The second other weakness in this is that it doesn't try and sort out cause and effect. And what we know from widespread studies throughout the world is that the large majority of these children are afflicted by comorbid mental disorders. And these things are not caused by the gender dysphoria. People have shown that these came before it. And in that sense, the gender dysphoria was a symptom arising out of an original disturbance. And this doesn't look at that. Let's just ask this funny little question, yes, tick, and therefore it's propounded as if this is gospel truth, 1.2%. And then they throw in other people who didn't understand the question or whatever, 2.4, that's almost 4%. That means 1 in 25 people think they're gender. This is really, advertising is almost like flattery for it. This is manipulation of data.
Okay, so one of the other things they were, I guess you could say, advertising in the whole program was the benefit of puberty blockers. So let's just watch that scene on that, and then I'm keen for you to explain exactly what's going on here.
I know, just a little bit sharp. Doing real good.
Good boy.
The price to be his true self.
Ow, that one
Almost
hurt.
done.
Ouch, 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 ouch.
You're doing real good though.
So that's where puberty blockers can be helpful.
A medical intervention.
Puberty blockers, they turn off the sex hormone production, and by doing that, it stops puberty moving forwards.
And are they reversible?
So yeah, absolutely.
Have a lie down.
But there are some unknowns.
We know that bones, while someone's on a blocker, it's not that they're getting weaker, but they're just not building up in the same way they usually would do during adolescence. We still don't know when you're 60 or 70 whether that might have an impact.
Okay, that looked pretty painful. Dr. Whitehall, for our audience, what's puberty blockers and what do they mean? What effect do they have?
The puberty is started or initiated by a cascade of hormonal events, beginning somewhere in your head, going to the middle part of your head, and then hormones are secreted, which go around your body. They activate and mature the gonads, the testicles and the ovaries to produce secondary sex hormones. And in the process, you get the development of the opposite sex. But in the process also, they act upon the head. Now, the puberty blocker is a very clever little bit of protein which can be administered in that way, and it stops that cascade. So certainly puberty is blocked. So what does that mean? Well, what you are relying upon by these sex hormones is they are sexualizing. How do you ever work out whether you're a male or a female if you stop the influence on the brain and the structural effect and the psychological effect of the hormones that are designed to bring that about? That's why the birds and bees are out there when puberty comes. That's when people light up. Yeah, I'm a boy and I'm attracted to the girls. You can't expect somebody to understand sexuality when you stop those secondary hormones. But there's more than that. What the lady was saying is that there are many unknowns. What we should say is that there are many knowns that she has not talked about. Now, one of them is, in fact, a sideways effect of the hormone that they're blocking, which is a primary center of sexualization. We don't understand too much about it. But if you tickle that up in a rat, an immature rat, the female rat prepares to be mounted and the male rat prepares to do the job. And if you block it, then you are stopping a primary center of sexual orientation, as well as going on to stopping the secondary one, which comes with testosterone and things. So you are blocking the very process by which sexual orientation identity comes about. Anything else? Yes, because there are receptors for this hormone which is blocked all around the head. Some of them are concentrated in the limbic system, which is a center which causes integration of memory, emotion, ambitions, the way you're feeling, reward. It integrates them and leads you to some kind of an internal identity, which you then pursue. Now, the lady doctor has ignored all the work which has come out over a number of years from veterinary laboratories, for example, in her own country of origin, which I assume is the UK. That's at the University of Glasgow. It's all there. If I can read this, you can read it, Bob. She can read it. What they have shown there is that if you block, there is a sustained interruption of the structure and function of this coordinating limbic system. These are not my words. So what happens? Hundreds of genes, the function of hundreds of genes are interfered with. Well, what happens to the sheep? The sheep is much less clever in the mazes and is much more emotionally labile. The female sheep goes to pieces, defecating and urinating and so forth because of anxiety and whatever. The male sheep decides the only way to get to his mates down the other end of the maze is put down his head and charge. He loses his brain and he's done. So the behavior is interfered with. We are arguing that if you give the blockers, the kids are going to think straighter, when the sheep show that that doesn't happen. Moreover is this, that in all studies, almost everyone who starts on the blockers, almost everybody, goes on to the next phase, which is getting cross-sex hormones. Almost everybody.
Now, let's just come back to that. Can we just answer just a really key point? And that was that the doctor said with great certainty and confidence that these puberty blockers were totally reversible. Is that the case?
That's not what they're saying in the scientific literature coming out of, for example, the veterinary school in Glasgow, where they have given the puberty blockers to sheep. They've caused the sheep to volunteer their lives for medical science. They've looked at the limbic system and found that it has been disordered, and those they didn't kill, they then looked at their behaviour, and they showed that their behaviour was altered.
Although the cynical person listening to this would say, well, Dr. Whitehall, you're talking about animals, we're talking about humans.
Yes, well, that's true. I'll tell you another animal. Well, yes, that's exactly true. But their brains are not quite as smart as many of us. The neurological function is similar. The hormonal structure is similar. The overall design is similar. It's not a grand story up here, but it's at least of a house. And if you're using the same architectural principles and find that the house falls down, well, you can start, well, hang on a second, the big multi-story thing is likely to be flawed. Medical science is based upon extrapolation from laboratory evidence. That's
as a non-medical person, to stop a girl having her period and developing breasts, and to stop a boy from developing testicles, sex organs, and from facial hair, that's quite a major interruption. That's not just a simple little injection, is it? It's far more than that.
I don't know of any greater intervention in the brain and the body, apart from the egregious examples of the Second World War. I mean, this is really up there as a major intervention. And if it was to do with the function of an antibiotic or anything else, we would be demanding far more rigorous controls. This is no controls to this. The person who gives the stuff judges the effect. So there's this observer bias, no controls to those people who've had the problem were not it. And this is called experimentation. It's not my word. This is the definition of experimentation, which human rights organisations hammered out after the Second World War have put there for the preservation of the rights of children.
And the next phase is cross-sex hormones, which you've already alluded to. So let's just watch the very quick commentary on that.
When he nears 16, he could start on cross-sex hormones.
Hormones, both estrogen and testosterone, both have irreversible effects.
Well, I guess we should be glad that she's warned that they have irreversible effects, but that sounds pretty dramatic to go to cross-sex hormones, especially for a 15, 16-year-old, which in New Zealand, that is possible.
Well, we don't expect the children to be experts in themselves, we've already said, and we don't expect them to be experts in judging their future at 16 when they're already lined up and they're like the sheep. They don't want to do something different. They would rather stay with the flow. What's the flow? Is cross-sex hormones. Now, what the lady hasn't pointed out is yet other studies. These are not my studies, but adult males who have put onto estrogens, that is female hormones, when they've done MRI studies on the structure of the brain shrinks at a rate 10 times faster than aging after only 4 months of administration. These people never tell you that. And they're putting these kids on it at 16. Your brain doesn't stop growing until 25. Nobody knows. There are no animal studies here. We can just conjecture on the basis of the adult stuff that, yes, this is a growing brain and you're throwing estrogen at it. And in the meantime, all the male chromosomes are saying you develop this way, and now you're hosing it down with estrogens and say, no, we want you to go that way. And now are we surprised? And what antibiotic would you take that shrank your brain 10 times faster than aging? They don't mention this. This lady is saying, but they don't talk about this.
They try to make out that young people can make this decision and that there's informed consent, and they had this little commentary during the program as well.
We're there to ensure that they fully understand that information to make, truly informed consent. Also, with young people, we want to ensure they're not rushing, they're not usually rushing into things, but we do want to make sure that they're taking their time with things.
The judgment that will protect vulnerable people, I wish it had been made for me before I embarked on the devastating experiment of puberty blockers.
In December, the UK High Court ruled that prescribing blockers will require the permission of a judge in most cases.
What do you think about that?
think if young people who need blockers can't access them, that can potentially be very harmful for trans youth.
So I guess credit where credit's due, the Sunday program did have 4 seconds of pushback, which is the UK High Court saying that puberty blockers shouldn't be given to children under 16. The doctor doesn't like that decision. What did you think of the UK High Court decision?
Well, I actually gave a certain amount of evidence to that, reviewing the effects that have been reported by other people, the physiological effects. So in a sense, I'm a little bit caught up in that. But I agree. We don't allow them to go in the army. We do not believe they are capable of that kind of agency up until that age. And this is a massive intervention. And we know, other people know, it's not my work, that almost all of these gender-confused children reorientate into an identity congruent with their chromosomes through puberty. We know that. So why do you want to start shrinking their brains and everything like that just because the kid is saying, yeah, that's what I want, that's what I want? It's not our job as parents or even in society just to give in to people who we already define are not capable of knowing certain things.
And one of the narratives that we do get pushed is that children as young as 3 and 4 are making this decision. As soon as they can communicate, they say that they're born in the wrong body. That was one of the scenes from the documentary, which we won't show because, once again, it's very individual to that family. But that is a common narrative, that children as young as 3, 4, 5, 6 can determine that they have been born in the wrong body.
Well, it was common now because of all the external factors, the nurturing factors on the web and the school and everything. Common now, and we shouldn't be surprised because advertising works. This is the message that one way or another we're giving to young people, and we shouldn't be surprised if they are absorbing it. All I can say is let's get back to the older days when this was an exceedingly rare event. And when you look at the issues, the nurturing external cultural issues were paramount. And in those days, they sat down and analysed them. They didn't say, like in Victoria, unless you affirm this child into the new identity, we're going to put you into jail. In those days, there was such a thing as psychotherapy and help for the associated mental disorder. Can I just say one thing too, that what my colleague was saying is that something terrible is going to happen if you don't go ahead with the affirmation. And this is argued in the Victorian law and everything. Something terrible is going to happen. And no one wants anything terrible to happen. And what they're suggesting is that there will be suicide. That's the big issue. If you don't, better a live daughter than a dead son is the scripted answer to that. There is no evidence whatsoever anywhere that gender dysphoria per se in a child leads to suicide. Now, having said that, these children, we've already said, the majority of them have associated mental comorbidities, anxiety and depression. 20% are autistic in some people's studies. Now, we know that autistic children as well have a higher rate of self-harm. So we're not saying that this is nothing, you shouldn't worry about it. No, these are big red flags that something wrong is going on. And we should therefore be very, very careful, very compassionate, very caring about these people, lest they do self-harm. But to go the affirmation road because of this manipulating fear, this manipulating accusation that the child will commit suicide, that is spurious logic. That does not have scientific basis.
Well, the research that they presented, and it was presented both in the program but also on a news item the night before, was about studies that were showing that puberty blockers were the answer and good for mental health. Let's just play those 2 clips.
A new study from the University of Otago showed puberty blockers had a positive impact on mental health, but pointed out the lack of information on long-term physical effects.
It's not something that is taken lightly. With this area, again, it's always a benefits versus risks. So there needs to be, clear benefit from going on that blocker for that child as well.
This Christchurch doctor has been helping transgender youth pause puberty since 2004.
What the blockers do is give you space to explore that. And that's the important bit. And buying that time is really important because they're reversible.
The study collated research on puberty blockers from the last decade. It showed a really positive impact on mental health, but there's a lack of information on any long-term physical effects.
We need to help those who are in this situation so that their mental health can flourish and be who they are.
In a statement, the Ministry of Health says it has not conducted specific research on puberty blockers, but says all medical treatments have risks and benefits, and it's important these are discussed with the patient.
So I read a study by Chu and others from 2018 where they examined studies on puberty blockers over 70 years. I think they found 13 studies in 70 years, but they seem to be taking this grand conclusion that puberty blockers are the way to go, never mind the long-term effects.
Well, not only the article, but in that very issue of Pediatrics, a major journal, there were several articles, and the consistent message out of all those articles in reality is that we don't have enough evidence. Now, the articles that are saying, like it is a contact. Look, first of all, you have the child who's complaining that is confused and is anxious and depressed and so forth, comes into a very select environment with a whole lot of adults whose aim in life is to make the child, rightly, I'm not arguing this, to make the child feel happier. Now, suddenly the child has a prominence that he didn't really have before. And then if you take it to the school, suddenly is the kind of a cheerleader in the school. There is fame and if not fortune and so forth. This is not if you're doing a study on it, you are introducing huge confounders in it. That's just one confounder. The second confounder is that the people who are judging the effect are the ones who start the treatment. I don't wish to minimise their motivation. I applaud their concern for children. I'm sure that they are compassionate and well-meaning and all that stuff. I don't wish to cast any sort of aspersions against them in that sense. I'm just saying that intellectually I disagree, but emotionally I'm really on the same side. But I'm saying you can't judge a thing, right? If you've brought all these confounders into it, you're the ones who's judging what you have done, and you don't have any controls. So arguably there should be a group of confused children, and this will be difficult to organise because there's so many outside factors, who don't go onto it. Well, there is. The literature shows that almost all children will in fact revert to an identity congruent with their chromosomes through puberty if you don't mess them up. This is called watchful waiting. So these people are arguing against all the evidence that watchful waiting in expectation the child is going to grow out of it. They're rejecting all this. And they're only looking at their own reports.
I think you referred to the sexual orientating effects of natural hormones.
Yes. Exactly. The birds and bees when puberty comes.
So allowing the natural process to take place. Because one of the arguments...
That's why I disagree with the last lady, giving them time, space to explore. You're not giving someone space to explore their sexuality, like when you take all the oxygen out of the room, like oxygen is going to be that primary centre of sexualization, the whack of testosterone, the whack of estrogen that comes. That's what has a structural effect on the brain, which is interfered with if you delay puberty. That's been shown, that you delay the natural development, the structural development. These people don't talk about that, but it's not my work. It's other people's work. If you don't give the secondary sex hormones, your brain doesn't work in the way you think. It doesn't function in the same way as you would think, and you don't have the birds and the bees. It's this fatuous argument to give a child, you're neutering the child. In effect, you're chemically castrating the child, and then you expect him or her to work out whether he's a girl or a boy.
So, Dr. Whitehall, just finally, I guess the question we want to put to you is, what advice would you give to parents who are watching the program who like the families featured, and our hearts go out to them? They've got unhappy children who express changes that they want, and obviously the parents are wanting to do what they think is best. But our concern is that they're not getting the full information. What advice would you give to parents who watched the Sunday program?
I would say draw assurance from the statistics that show that the large majority of these children will grow out of it through puberty. That's the first one. The second one is that the large majority of them are also shown to have comorbid mental distress, mental diagnoses like anxiety and depression. We just mentioned that. That needs to be addressed. And
some critics would say that because their child is trans, they develop the depression and the anxiety because of the way they're being treated.
Yes, I agree, and that's what the proponents say. But many studies show that in fact the child had the problem before the symptom of dysphoria arose. For example, autism. We know, sadly, that autistic kids don't have the same grasp of reality as other people do, and therefore to have the symptom develop later on that they're not sure whether they're girls or boys when they have major difficulties relating to everybody is not a reason that we should then give them hormones to substantiate their confusion.
Dr. Whitehall, there's just one thing that I really struggle with is, for example, I have a dear friend who's a close family member has anorexia nervosa and is effectively starving herself to death because she thinks she's fat, but in fact she's very, very thin. The interesting approach to that, where the mind is different to the reality, she thinks she's fat, she's actually very skinny, she's willing to harm herself to fix that problem. We don't offer liposuction and weight loss pills and reinforce that belief. I guess you could say we try to heal the mind, but we've lost that approach with kids who struggle with their gender dysphoria. Why do we treat the two so separately when they seem so similar?
Well, I think they are, and that's what, when you argue the child knows best and we should let them declare they're a boy or a girl, we don't do that. I agree, we don't do that with anorexia nervosa. We don't give them time to explore their starvation because the kids will die. What's the difference? The difference, somehow this ideology, this religion of gender fluidity has come out of the woodwork somehow or other. That this gives a new interpretation to human behavior, a new expectation for a new definition of sin. In a way, sin is not going ahead with the affirmation. A new definition of salvation in the Victorian law. Where does salvation lie? That lies in the embracing of your sexual problem. I can only understand this as the very successful almost victory, and sometimes I think it seems like a victory, very successful onslaught by a new ideology stroke religion. And it just shows you how people are susceptible to that kind of siren call. Come with us and happiness is here. Come with us and the explanation of human nature is here. And this is going to make a better world. It's a utopian ideology in that sense. So that's the only way I can understand the difference between the way we treat anorexia nervosa and the other, what we used to call body identity disorder, or that is to say, gender dysphoria.
And I mean, we've had to do this special feature because this side of the debate is never presented in the media. I'm sure you're not on auto dial with the media with your views, are you?
Do you mean that I'm not popular with the media? Yes, I think that's, and with a large section of the medical profession. I mean, every time I go on, the media saying these things. And mind you, Bob, what I have said is I'm not commenting on those families. And what I have done is just brought to you research that other people have done. I'm like plagiarism here. I'm giving you other people's things. It's not mine. I'm referring you to other work. Now, for doing that, yes, people make complaints to APRA, the medical board, to the university, to blah, blah, blah. And thus far, I haven't been struck off. But I don't know what would happen in the state of Victoria, because down there it is a criminal act to induce somebody to seek help with confusion over gender identity or sexual orientation. And in sexual orientation, they talk about sexual behaviour. This program could induce somebody in Victoria to seek counselling to overcome gender confusion or other things, and then somehow or other it would come to the Victorian Thought Police, known as the Commission to investigate these things. I could go to jail for a public broadcast which induced somebody to take a different path than the one mandated under the law, which is affirmation of a child to the opposite gender. Yeah, that's how bad it is here.
Yeah, and it's that's coming to New Zealand as well.
I thought I might come over there.
No, we wouldn't let you in the border. You'd be stopped. Look, what we would do is encourage viewers to read your excellent paper that you've written for us, Children Transitioning, a Childhood Gender Dysphoria, a Pediatrician's Warning to New Zealand, because it has all the background information and goes into much more detail than we've been able to in this short broadcast. So, Dr. Whitehall, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking the truth. Don't stop speaking the truth. Even if we have to share cells, that's okay, because it's more important that we get the truth out there. So, thank you.